Are you ready to explore how people coordinate, to build and empower your community, to take action and solve problems, to coordinate without any central authority? What? Bringing in the OGs of the pre-crypto decentralized coordination space together with the pioneers of the cutting-edge technologies to fuse their ancient knowledge with the latest tools in order to fight coordination failures, slay Moloch, and continue the endless search for the holy grails of decentralized coordination. Welcome to the front lines of coordination. Fuck. My brain is already melting. I hope you survive. Welcome, Travis. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
That's great to hear. Travis here is one of my favorite, if not the favorite, crypto philosopher, if he would allow me to call him that.
Yeah, sure.
He's a part of Dollhouse and the Pluriverse and probably a bunch of other projects, but I'm gonna let him give a better intro himself.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I appreciate that, man. Maybe I'm an informal philosopher, academic dropout philosopher, non-credentialed. Yeah, my name is Travis. I've been in the Web3 space for a couple of years now. I would consider myself definitely a more culturally focused contributor rather than a technical person. Although I spend my time doing a variety of UX research and UI design stuff for some DAOs and increasingly more and more lore crafting, storytelling, and kind of ideological alignment type work. And that takes the form of a project that I started recently called Pluriverse, pluriverse.wtf. I'm also a contributor to DAO House, hacking on the Moloch DAO contracts, and a mercenary in the ranks of Raid Guild. That's where I spend most of my time these days, yeah.
What got you here? How did you get involved in all of this?
Oh, okay. Well, my origin story is kind of long and complicated, but the simple answer is I came in through Moloch DAO. I was attracted to the memes, to the idea of Moloch, and also to the kind of Web3 narrative of how Moloch DAO started as a grant-giving organization. And early on, listened to some conversations between Kevin Awaki and Amin Soleimani describing Moloch being connected to the Slate Star Codex blog and having that make a strong connection to Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl, and having that just funnel me down the rabbit hole of connecting these cultural influences with the technical game theory of coordination and Moloch as the god of coordination failure and all that. And I was just like sold. So through Moloch DAO, got really connected with the Metacartel community, which is the first fork of Moloch DAO. The first, I don't know, are they the first? Yeah, I think they are. The first fork of that kind of grant-giving DAO structure on Moloch contracts. And just got really, connected with the DAO House peeps, the Raid Guild friends, and all the rest.
Nice. And it happened pretty fast, right?
It happened pretty fast. I mean, I probably spent 6 to 12 months cutting my teeth, learning about Web3, figuring out how to kind of attempt to rehabilitate a DAO which seemed to be sleeping or comatose, depending on how you think about it, suffering from its own internal coordination failures. And, just to make organic connections. I'm not really a Degen. I didn't get drawn into crypto through DeFi or anything like that, through the tokens really at all, but more of the high level philosophy, the politics, the various kinds of connections to things in my own background as an artist, as a musician, as a community organizer, as an anarchist, as a aging punk, things like that. All those kinds of cultural affinities are what brought me in.
Right. All these Web3 philosophies had something to stick onto, like to latch onto your
previous philosophy. So were you familiar with the Moloch meme from before, or like the interest in coordination, or like what was your exact angle, if I may ask?
I was familiar with Ginsberg's poem Howl before. Yeah, absolutely. And I was familiar with Moloch in that poem and also with a cover, I guess you could say. Well, there was this band that was really influential on me growing up called Man is the Bastard. They were from Claremont, California. They were like a crazy, the genre was described as power violence. They were basically like a brutal kind of punk metal, crusty band combined with power electronic noise. And they did this incredible cover of Ginsberg's poem, Howl, and, just screaming Moloch at punk shows. It was when I first heard about it, probably as a teenager, maybe. So that's quite a long time ago. And yeah, so I think that was my first introduction, which is something I continue to remember and think about quite often these days. In fact, while because within the meta cartel community and also just within Web3 more generally, that uses Moloch as a kind of common enemy for us all to align behind, I guess. There's this suggestion that maybe Moloch has run its course as a meme, as an idea, as a target, and that maybe it's time for the Moloch meme to evolve. And I'm really interested in that conversation and in thinking about, dreaming about what other memes or like forms or images could serve its place, and even just in thinking about how the ecosystem is evolving and why some people might think that that meme is no longer appropriate. And yeah, trying to kind of practice that self-awareness on the tech and the culture and all that.
Right. And would you say just the part of the reason for that is that it might be scaring off the newcomers, or just like that it's getting old, boring? What do you think is the thing with the need?
I think that's part of it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been speaking to a few different people about it and they seem to identify a few different things. Yeah, part of it is that Moloch, with its roots within Canaanite or Carthaginian, basically as a symbol of evil, as a symbol of baby sacrifice that is often misinterpreted as basically an image of Satan. It's like easy to understand how that would turn off our ability to basically onboard the masses, like to scale for mass appeal. But on the other hand, that was like part of the design, right? Like to serve as a memetic filter so that the people that are here understand the potency of that image, and it creates like a really tight knit community first kind of orientation. So I see both sides of it. I mean, I'm personally not so keen on the narrative of scaling Web3 too fast. Like I'm really not an accelerationist. I am really not someone that believes in a move fast and break things kind of mentality. I don't think that it's that useful really to be thinking about scaling DAOs 1000x in the next 10 years, or narratives of this nature. I find to be kind of contentless and slightly delusional, to be honest. So I personally think that the power of the image, or the potency of the meme, to strengthen that internal alignment and allow us these opportunities to continue to rethink about what we're doing and why, most importantly, why we're building, is more important, higher priority. And to that extent, I think Moloch, still has a lot of juice, a lot of potency as a meme. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. We don't want to scale too fast and too much. Like we just get all of this cultural dilution, which has been happening with every bull cycle. And then, yeah, that's why I'm really happy to see people like you who kind of joined during the last cycle, but not because of those reasons. Because I felt like each new cycle, there was like just more and more people who are here for the money, and less people who are like here for what like the OGs are here for.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, I've heard like how the Moloch meme can scare away the new people, and I've also seen like for us maybe it's easy to understand and it's like somewhat easy to explain as well, but still like especially for people who know Moloch as the god of child sacrifice, whatever. And they'll be like, oh yeah, but it's all like also there's this post about like Moloch is the god of coordination failure and blah blah blah, and you should go read it, and then it's a post that takes like 45 minutes to read, and then nobody reads it. So it's not exactly an onboarding tool, that's for sure.
Yeah, but if once you understand it, so yeah, child sacrifice, right? Moloch is the god of child sacrifice for sure, but it's so rich as an allegorical image, as a mythological image. It's sacrificing children in times of war to basically secure successful coordination, like to win the war. So to sacrifice our future, to sacrifice the hope of the next generation, of tomorrow, for local and immediate and desperate security. Like that speaks so strongly to me about a despair and also a delusion of self-interestedness in the world these days. And well, I mean, I think a lot about that these days with the Pluriverse project, and basically with all of the DAOs that I contribute to and all of the conversations I have within Web3. I think it's undeniable that like part of the unlock for successful coordination has to happen on the personal level, and to change our own minds and to shift our own priorities and what we will choose, like what are we even able to choose to be incentivized by, whether, basically a shift from self-interestedness towards not necessarily so extreme as altruism, but more selflessness for sure, more towards the collective, right? More towards like a need to make that sacrifice a positive thing and a willing thing, not in a degenerate way, not in a way that closes off the future, but in a willing kind of, an extension of the self to the other. And that's conviviality. Like that's collectiveness, like collective gratitude, and that's reciprocity. That's building together. That's like, as Metacartel says, like that's going far together. So I think that starts on an individual level, which is something I've already been thinking about for much of my life, how to instigate that change in myself. But then it has to somehow migrate, like it has to pass to others, right? Like we have to somehow create common shared values in our friend groups and our family groups, and then have that scale up into our communities, and then have those organizations scale into whole networked societies that transmit those positive values. I mean, people just put that under the umbrella of regen or green pill or whatever. But I think really the profundity of that movement, if you want to call it a movement, is, this much older idea of like you change yourself if you want to change the world, or like put your head in the right direction and your body will follow.
Right. Yeah, and I like this like more balanced approach. Like it's not necessarily just collectivism, and like, as you said, like it's not altruism. It's still like doing what's good for yourself as well. But it's not, it's not focused on so much on the individual, and that's what I like about this part of the space, or like, at least the DAO space. That's more like it. I know, like the early crypto scene of like the Bitcoin, it was more focused on individuals and like the self-sovereign individual, and how it's all about becoming independent. And then the more it evolved like into the DAO space, it became more about these like collectivist visions and coordination between humans, and like actually building functional societies rather than cutting out yourself from the society and like attaining financial freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. All those things are connected, right?
Right. But yeah, so like from the sort of dark Moloch meme into the Pluriverse, which is a much more colorful and brighter vision, I guess. Do you want to tell us more about the Pluriverse?
Yeah, sure. Let's see where to even begin. Yeah, okay. So the Pluriverse, what the fuck is it? It's basically an experiment in imagining what the future consists of that we are building towards. So it's a lore crafting project. And what's interesting, I was thinking about this morning actually, like how do I describe Pluriverse in a sentence or something? It's like it's a Web3 tool where there is no tool. Like it's a a project that comes out of the Web3 DAO ecosystem that actually doesn't have a technology that we're building or a DAO structure underlying it. It's focused first and foremost on a meditation on the culture and on the ideology. And I guess, if anything, storytelling as a kind of imagination technology. So what that amounts to, basically, we launched a guide at MCon 2 in September of last year in Denver. So that guide outlined some mechanics for what you could consider to be a Web3 and DAO-centric experiment in collective lore crafting, with a kind of sketch for a preliminary DAO architecture and a way of decentralizing the stewardship of canon, like within a story, like if you consider it to be a sci-fi story that Ethereum is collectively kind of building as the narrative of what we're building for, and then like how to invite contributors to build upon that story where they are also able to collectively own their contributions and all of that. But to be honest, in the months following MCon, a lot of that kind of pivoted, because we found in thinking it through and hacking on it, that we were becoming really distracted with a lot of the DAO architecture and the overhead, and also having it be a very difficult thing to fundraise for. And we kind of just stripped it all down to just the stories. So now what we're doing is we've been writing comics with Gitcoin at first, and then now with Super Modular and with other organizations. We're writing really complex ideas into graphic novel form. And the idea is to try to force ourselves to distill what are the core values and visions of the ecosystem, and to try to show those values, like demonstrate them in the art rather than just tell as some form of propaganda. So, the goal there is to kind of influence, so to speak, or infuse, maybe is a better word, the hearts and minds of the population to understand really what's at stake here and to kind of internalize it. But at the same time, we're moving beyond comics and towards a more, I guess you could say, transmedia focus. So more recently, Pluriverse formed a partnership with Metacartel to form a kind of working group to think through some of these ideas together, and to think about different forms that it could take and different ways of communicating these Ethereum-centric vision and values. And what that's turning into are two things that I'm really excited about. One is a Pluriverse concept album, an album of music, and that is able to basically taking the idea that music is the universal language, right? Or should we say the pluriversal language, that you can kind of like bypass the friction that language can cause and go straight to the heartstrings, like straight, maybe even, dare I say, to the soul, and have it be something that is have it be a medium, a kind of telekinetic tether that anyone and everyone can kind of approach, and maybe not really immediately be able to put into words and understand in that cerebral way, but have an experience of the vision and values in a more corporeal way, a more experiential way. And then the other part of the project is art, which, yes, this will be an NFT campaign, but I think significantly, we're not starting with a novel mechanism for how to sell, either an economic mechanism for how to sell the NFTs as a fundraising effort, or a novel smart contract, NFT contract mechanism for playing with the mechanics of what's possible, or anything like that. We're starting with art production as the main emphasis. So we commissioned an artist who's really one of my favorite people in the world to make physical art, in order to actually think about some of the problems or frictions or potentials of migrating the physical work into the digital work and world through the NFTs. So really all of this amounts to, again, like Pluriverse is a protocol with no protocol. We're a product with no product. It's storytelling first. So all of this in my mind just amounts to this almost alchemical meditation, like thinking about how to transmute this digital content into physical content and vice versa, how to transmute the Ethereum values into mass appeal, comprehension, and vice versa, and like many other things that we could touch on. But yeah, that's like the high level flyby of what I've been up to lately.
That sounds awesome. So how can we get some of that at MetaFest?
How can you get some for MetaFest? Yeah.
Some art, some music. We want all of it.
Yeah, man. Well, maybe we can figure out how to get the band over there and play a live show. That would be cool.
Oh, that would be epic. And what's the genre?
The genre. I would say it's I could give you a really specific made up genre, or I could just simply say it's experimental. It's electronic, predominantly electronic. They use a variety of really interesting instruments, synthesizers, and various kinds of sequencers and drum machines to get some really awesome otherworldly sounds. But there's also a lot of, I guess you could say, acoustic percussion and strings and voices, and a very poetic lyricism, almost like a spoken word way of reciting the lyrics on top. So it has like really strong storytelling elements. It's very immersive. Like it's definitely headphone music, or like you need a really nice quality sound system to listen to it. Like you can't listen to it out of your phone, you won't hear like 60% of the sounds because it has such a wide spectrum. I'm really fucking stoked about it. The artists are incredible, and what they produced is incredible, and it like melts my brain every time I listen to it.
We do plan on having a really good sound system, so
Yeah, maybe if nothing else, we could figure out a sound installation at MetaFest. That would be cool.
okay, that would be cool. All right, we'll continue talking about that in private.
Yeah.
And so I want to roll back to what you said about how you kind of pivoted because of the problems with using the DAO structure, or like the DAO tooling, something like that. You want to talk more about that?
Sure. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily problems with like using a DAO or summoning a DAO or anything like that. It was more of, well, our original conception of the Pluriverse.wtf project was to be a community first and collective experiment in lore crafting, to basically exit to community immediately and put all of our efforts up front towards building that community and empowering them to participate. And after the initial launch of the guide, we were thinking that this was a little bit backwards. Like we had this guide which kind of served as almost a white paper and almost like a backstory, origin story, like almost context, but it wasn't an explicit manifesto, and there wasn't explicit codes of conduct or entry points for participation. And yeah, the first 3 months were just spent knocking our heads against the wall, thinking about how to design community architecture. And 3 months passed and we didn't write any new stories. We didn't have any new narratives. We didn't have any new creative projects. And at some point, here's the thing. Here's what it really came down to. We realized that all we want to do is make stories. All we want to do is focus on the ideologies. There's so many incredible builders in the space that are dedicated upon those hard problems that it makes a lot more sense for us to spin down the DAO ambitions and focus more on partnerships with people and like, organizations and companies that are doing that way better than we could ever hope to. In some ways, kind of a soft pivot, and in some ways, like kind of returning to some of our initial ambitions. And ultimately, I think it's going to work out great. Like as far as I'm having some really interesting conversations with people launching novel forms of NFTs and various ways of organizing communities together. And we get to focus on the lore craft.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think a lot of DAOs are distracted with all the DAO stuff. Like, okay, if you know the governance and the onboarding, whatever other stuff. and then not focusing on the work itself. So I think the pivot makes complete sense.
Yeah. Well, I think all that stuff is really important too, but the architecture needs to match the content. And what we realized is without having clear strategies or clear entry points for participation, there wasn't really anything to govern. And if it was just going to be us writing these stories as to write the stories in such a way where they would evolve into invitations or to like identify these missing areas that other people would be able to fill in later, then it was like advantageous to everyone basically to remove all the governance and just I mean, dare I say it, like just to YOLO it, just to like make a small, scrappy, lean team and just run super fucking fast and just go back to trying to be prolific in the storytelling, you know?
And so, how has the story writing side been going since SemCon? Are there a lot of stories, or more focused on the music stuff?
Yeah, there are a lot of stories. So since we gave up on the DAO architecture, we have been writing a lot and working with a few different artists. We're currently sitting on probably like 10 really interesting narrative seeds that cover all different kinds of content from across the ecosystem, from some of these social issues with DAOs and meta governance to things like AI integrations and automation and responding to a lot of the important high level philosophical topics within the space, everything from like Balaji's network state ideas and how that kind of correlates to various libertarian leanings and the pros and cons of that, when put into a sci-fi narrative about what the next 100 to 1,000 years looks like. To obviously Kevin Owocki is a big influence in the project, and the ideas of regen crypto economics and how crypto can be infused with ideas gleaned from permaculture and various kinds of optimistically oriented forms of digital democracy and coordination success. And the whole green pill solar punk idea is also like really important content. So we're writing stories all over the place and figuring out ways of kind of iterating upon them simultaneously all at once so we can start pushing this stuff out, and yeah, just pushing it out sooner than later.
And how do you plan on publishing them? Will they be going out like all together in a book, or will you be publishing them one by one as NFTs, or what's the idea?
Yeah, we have a lot of ideas for that. Definitely, I'm interested in the physical artifact. And obviously, there's a lot of potential for NFT distribution. So it might not be very interesting to talk about. But yeah, we're basically exploring ways of distributing the comics page by page, which is kind of interesting in terms of building a collectorship that incentivizes long-term attention over just like impulsive buying of a single book. But at the same time, it brings up a lot of interesting questions to me about how to write a story that is released in installments without knowing the end before we start releasing, Like normally you'd write a book beginning to end, you'd release it as one thing, it's like finished. And then you could have a sequel and a sequel or whatever. But how could we write a story where we like set off in a direction, not knowing where it's going to end up? And maybe is it an infinite project, or do we just like arbitrarily decide a number of pages? Or it brings up all kinds of interesting questions. The simple answer is we're going to definitely release books, and we're definitely going to release NFTs, but the details of which remain very fluid and open.
Okay, fair enough. And is it like all sci-fi, like set in the future, or is there any mythology? Like, is Moloch also a part of the Pluriverse, or are you like steering clear of like the mythological stuff and more to the like futuristic stuff?
I think it's all in there. Yeah, we've I've tried to complicate the Moloch meme to not just be this bull-headed Carthaginian demon and become more. There's like a taxonomy of Molochs, now. We're thinking about, a biological Moloch, like in the form of cancer, or a psychological Moloch that creates demented delusions or hallucinations, like basically trying to complicate that meme and apply it towards as many different varieties as there are coordination failures in this world. There's other characters that are staples. Like we have a character that we just refer to as Anon, who is a kind of like gender fluid, identity fluid, ambiguously aged kind of gamer girl, someone that you would imagine spending a lot of time in the VR space and, like having AI robot friends as pets in the not too distant future, but is also basically an archetype of the future of the Taoists. If Web3 were to scale and regen crypto economics is successful and we enter into this future city, which is somehow solar punk and lunar punk kept in balance, and you could call it the quadratic lands, but certainly it would have some utopian elements mixed with some dystopian elements based on like if you look at all of human history, it's never going to be fucking perfect, but we do have to have some kind of target to dream for. And so then Anon becomes this opportunity of like the first person or third person perspective that we can tell stories through their experience kind of navigating this future place, the future quadratic lands. There's many other details as well, things like, governance structures and various temples and architectures that we're imagining, where some of this, purely dissociated and remote kind of hacking that we're doing now, like largely on Discord and Telegram and stuff like that, will actually be physically instantiated, and what those spaces feel like and look like, and how issues of remote digital democracy will differ from IRL digitally supported democracy, and all kinds of stuff like that. Basically, anything that you can think of that's an interesting little thread to pull within the Web3 DAO space is something that we're trying to pull. We're trying to pull all the threads and weave them all together into a bunch of psychedelic tapestries.
Awesome, sounds good. Yeah, I would love to contribute a story at some point. I actually wrote this post about like Ethereum, where do we go next? Around the time where the proof of stake launch was like, okay, so what's the next narrative? Like what we have the proof of stake here, which is kind of like this point that everybody was looking forward to. So like, where do you go from here? Where do we see the space in 10, 20 years? Like what's the goal of all of this? And then at the end of the post, I tried getting people to write different stories about like what kind of future they see in like 2050 or something. It didn't go very well. Like I was the only one who actually wrote a story. But yeah, so I definitely interested in that.
Yeah, I'll send them over to you, man. I would really value your feedback, and maybe there's actually some way that we can figure out to collaborate on some stories too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to having more time to like focus on content again. Like it's been a long time and it's really like what I enjoy the most, but yeah, always something more important, unfortunately, like fundraising for MetaFest or for Metagame or something, always dragging my attention away from content creation. But right, so yeah, moving on to Regen stuff. So you mentioned Regen beyond crypto and within crypto, and I want to maybe start with like what's your rough estimate? How much of the crypto space do you think is about Regen stuff?
Oh, fuck. I don't know. I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. How much of the total crypto space is oriented towards regen? I mean, if I had to guess, I would say a pitifully small amount.
Yeah.
I think most people are still mostly motivated towards money. I think really, even in a bear market where all the treasuries are very light and the distribution of funding is very fickle, I still think most of the value is captured in the pure economic functionality of blockchain tech, and that means devaluing a lot of the governance and would be political, or I guess ideological would be a better way of saying it, and like cultural value that disseminates from all of it. It's all that is still seen very much as a novelty. And regen, I think, is a growing movement. I don't know if you'd call it a movement, but it's a growing force, and it's certainly significant and important and impactful. I feel like, you could create a correlation to actual regenerative ideas even beyond crypto, though. Like, how do we even distinguish, I don't know, like a corporation like Shell Oil Company or something like that, saying that they're interested in researching green energy production from like the general back to the land hippie movement in the 60s and 70s, or like at what point basically is their actual momentum behind these ideas and implementing them into actionable strategies, and how much of it is just a kind of greenwashed hype that, like recycling, where we put this Coca-Cola can into a certain container and then we feel better about just consuming this really unhealthy beverage. And it's like, oh, this town doesn't even have a recycling program. So you're putting it into this certain colored box, and then someone else is just putting it into the landfill anyways. Or I don't know. These are weird examples. I guess I'm just saying that it's something that's really important if it's authentic, but is also something that we should be wary of and skeptical of, to make sure that we're actually following through with these ideologies, not just placating a population or, making ourselves feel better about otherwise degenerate activities.
Right, definitely. Like, yeah, greenwashing is becoming a problem, and like, yeah, it's becoming, the more profitable it becomes to be regenerative, the more we'll have people who are just like LARPing as regions, or like, yeah, just doing things that aren't actually so regenerative. But yeah, like the reason I'm asking is because I thought, like, okay, like just following my Twitter and like the spaces that I'm a part of, it seems like, oh yeah, everybody's talking about region stuff, everybody's talking about DAOs. But then even when I went to eat Denver and say, okay, like, no, like most projects have nothing to do with any of this stuff, and like there's still a lot of projects focused even on this, like core infrastructure stuff, or like different layer ones or layer twos, whatever. And Denver is also like a part of this scene, so like they have a DAO, and like they had like, there was like the region land, there was the DAO space inside the Denver, and like Ethereum space like has the most of these kind of projects. Like when you look at to the rest of the crypto, I mean, there's exceptions like the what is it called? There's like a chain or two that are like specifically focused on the region projects, but most other blockchains like don't have any of this stuff, and like it's all like DeFi fintech sort of stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm living in this tiny region bubble that makes it look like crypto is more regenerative and DAO like than it actually is. But yeah, like I'm really happy to see it become more popular in the crypto space, and I think yeah, big part of the reason for that I would say is Milwaukee. Like people have been talking about it for a while before, and then when he started talking about it and started green pill, then like it seemed that it really took off as an idea, and a lot more people started talking about that stuff and starting such projects. So I think that's great. And obviously there's most region space is outside of crypto, and crypto people don't know most of the region space. Similarly, like with DAOs, and like I saw people who were saying like, oh yeah, this is the first time ever that we are able to build decentralized organizations, blah blah blah. And it's like, nope, decentralized organizations have existed for thousands of years. It's just we didn't have this specific technology.
Yeah.
Most decentralized organizations aren't DAOs yet.
Right.
So yeah, just wanted to talk more about like the region stuff beyond and beyond crypto.
Yeah. Sure. Well, I mean, you bring up a lot of good points. I think you're right. Like Kevin Owocki and Green Pill, and also like all of Gitcoin has really mobilized, I think, behind regenerative value creation. And yeah, as you mentioned, even blockchains like I think it's Celo, and the Regen network has their own kind of blockchain. I think that they're hacking on. Do they, or is it just token? I don't know. But like it still seems largely about using the existing technology in order to orient towards things like putting carbon credits on chain, carbon offsets on chain, and donating a certain amount of yields towards restorative means, whether that's ecological or social justice or like it remains somewhat vague to me when we throw around the word regen, or you know definitely a very different but related term is public goods. When we throw these ideas around so much that they almost become empty signifiers without correlating to something really concrete. Like I do understand that there's a lot of complexity there. There's a need for regeneration at every layer of the social stack, of the civilization stack, so to speak. There's a need for regenerative practices within our economic schemas and within our relationship structures, as well as how a otherwise like capitalist or industrially motivated civilization expansion, just like this whole colonial frontiersman type narrative of continuous manifest destiny, needs to pivot in its orientation towards something that doesn't pull resources from the earth, but cultivates them, like nurtures a relationship of living with the land in a way that is reciprocal and somehow more humbled, less entitled, and more about living with it or being dependent upon it, more interdependent rather than dependent. So all I'm saying is, in general, to the extent that we believe that we understand what we're talking about, I feel really aligned behind it. But I am also curious about if we really do understand what we're referring to when we use these words like regen or regenerative crypto economics. And then I become very interested in getting into the specifics for sure.
Yeah, there's many things to regenerate, and not just the nature, but as you say, like social systems as well, like within communities or whatever. And then you see, like in crypto, like 90% or even more maybe projects that are like region projects are just about like, oh yeah, we're putting carbon on chain. It's like, okay, so can we move on to other stuff? Like that's cool, that's useful, that's awesome, but there's a lot of regenerative stuff to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I feel a little bit strange. I certainly do not want to come off as just a blatant cynic or skeptic of the motivations here. I think the meta crisis, for example, which Kevin Iwaki has had Daniel Schmachtenberger on his podcast, on the Green Pill podcast a few times, like I really do believe that that's one of the most significant problems that we could and should be oriented around, not just within the Web3 ecosystem, but really across the world, regardless of where we're located and what an individual might be up to. Like it's that kind of super high level systems thinking of cascading orders of effects, of how one decision is related in, through network effects to every other kind of outcome, and trying to make sense of that complexity through DAOs, for example, DAOs as an experiment in collective sense making, and at the same time understanding that in order to converge on the problem, we kind of have to tear apart, or pick apart, I should say, that complexity and deal with one order of magnitude at a time. Like there's different kinds of awareness of that kind of meta crisis, of that meta problem that regenerative crypto economics is trying to solve for, at least, offers the potential to be able to solve for. And I mean, in general, I think I'm attracted to the complexity. I'm also continuously really inspired by the failures of that conversation. So again, I don't want to sound cynical or pessimistic, but the conversation about how to regenerate and how to change our own minds and how to manifest solutions and strategies in relation to actionable steps for the meta crisis remains really abstract, really vague, really difficult to understand. it's not just a single problem, it's a whole cascading avalanche of interrelated problems. And that problem space is, I mean, not only existentially important, but yeah, continuously inspiring. It's like the most engaging kind of problem that I could imagine ruminating upon and trying to make sense of. And, the thing is that I don't think an individual can make sense of it. I think it requires collective sense making. It's like the best use case for a problem to coordinate around. It is Moloch, right? The meta crisis is Moloch, to come back to that. And I think it requires a very nuanced, deeply sensitive orientation towards the importance of that meme, of those ideas, and like a dedication to unpack them very carefully and to take risks, to do it collectively and in public, and to reconsider what it is that we're prioritizing. All of these things, I don't know, I feel like I'm speaking a little vaguely here, but these are the kinds of issues that come up in my mind when thinking about ideas, regenerative crypto specifically. Like, how does it interface the way that I live on a daily basis, being off grid out here in the desert? Like, how does the technology that I'm contributing to and the communities that I'm contributing to eventually feed back into effects on my local ecosystem and inform my local behavior? Like, thinking about the interconnectedness of the global tech stack, yeah, remains really fascinating, really fun, really important.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as much as I loved like the whole idea of meta crisis and like spent hours and hours of like researching this stuff and like the game B, but it's like so abstract and like composed of so many different problems and crises, or like complex and like in complex relations to each other. So it's like just not very actionable to most people. Like most people read this stuff and it's like, okay, but yeah, as you said, like how does this relate to my community? Like what the fuck can I do with this stuff? Like it's super interesting, but what now? And that's pretty much like what got me to start metagame, because I was researching this stuff and like there was no projects that were like trying to actually do anything. So it was all like theoretical and philosophical and super interesting, but like, okay, so what can we actually do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's definitely a part of the problem. And I think it kind of starts at the individual level, kind of going back to what we talked about previously. I don't know if like what crises are considered a part of the meta crisis, but we have like the meaning crisis or the opioid crisis, which are like in obvious relationship to each other. And like those are like start at the individual level of like helping people find meaning in their own lives and like help them find agency. And it's also like at the community level of like connecting people with communities and where they can actually do this stuff. And then it goes to intentional communities, and like you said, you're a part of one. And yeah, at the individual level, but you can't really solve it at the individual level, because for a person to actually live a fulfilled life, the research kind of shows that like people need other people to like be connected to other people to live a fulfilled life. And it goes also back to like regenerative stuff, and what it seems to me is that like a lot of the people who are actually living regenerative lives are the people who are living in these sort of eco-villages and intentional communities where they are actually living closer to the earth and like practicing these like permaculture and other stuff that's like more regenerative. So yeah, I would love to talk more about the intentional communities and like the community that you're a part of where you live.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, just real quick, like just as a final comment to the meta crisis thing, and I think the meta crisis is this hyper object, right? It's like how Timothy Morton describes hyper objects, where you could you could feel a raindrop on your head and have a very local experience of the weather, and you can look up into the sky and understand that there's clouds and patterns and shifting barometric pressures that everyone is able to see, but from a slightly different angle. But then there's like this weather, this global scale distribution of those high and low pressures, hot and cold temperatures, and continuously shifting volatile fluctuations. And no, it's like we require satellites to be able to see that. We require so many diverse, sensitive instruments in order to be able to tap into the weather patterns. Like we really don't, that's not a thing so much as a gestalt, like a pattern that things can emerge from and also dissolve back into. And so that's, I think, a really good metaphor, a really good image for thinking about what the meta crisis is. Like there is no thing there. There's like an emergent complexity that we can have little local instances of, but really is requires like collective sensing in order to engage with it in any kind of meaningful way. But yeah, from there, I mean, in thinking about those interrelations, like in a more personal level, you're asking about intentional communities. It's that kind of thinking that ultimately drove me towards exploring intentional community formation and organization. And so I live in an earthship off grid outside, well, in northern New Mexico. And it's been an opportunity to kind of get some dirt under my fingernails to think about how we design our physical spaces in relation to a kind of awareness of those larger hyperstructures. You know, there's like an earthship, for example, has passive heating elements and has a roof that's fashioned in a way to collect rain as it falls from the sky and uses solar panels and is completely cut off, like off grid, which is not unique to Earthships. Like there's many structures that can be off grid, but it's like interesting to think about being severed from the dependency on municipal utilities like electricity and water, or even like more base things. Like I hope this doesn't sound crass, but I have a compost toilet, right? Like I can walk behind my house to my compost pile and be looking at 3 years of my own waste that I'm composting and turning into soil. So just by me living here, by me being physically present and having this thing which normally you'd put into a toilet and flush away so you don't have to deal with it and require these huge industrial operations to clean and sanitize and redistribute the water, this really primitive and very direct method allows me to put this thing that's normally considered waste as like as a nutrient offering towards regenerating topsoil. And so just like thinking about how these nutrients and how the energy circulates in this house and in this place and how that can scale to a community, like I think that's something that's been deeply impactful on me as a contributor to the DAO space. And then if you think about scaling that and organizing a whole community around that kind of, global awareness or like hyperstructure kind of sensitivity, well, I mean, shit gets really exciting real quick, right? Like that's a really direct action kind of way of having profound engagement with the environment that you're immersed in. Like practicing a way of not just feeling, but knowing that there is an interdependency between you and your environment.
Right. Yeah, and it seems to be where a lot of these Game B people are going as well. Like I had Jim Rutt on the podcast last time. No, last time it was Brandon Norgard. And actually both of them talked about physical communities as like this sort of starting point for building new kinds of in society. So like communities to like really start enacting these philosophies. And it's also like, yeah, as you said, like you're there and it's kind of becomes a necessity. Like you're not it's not just that you need to get rid of your waste, but also like you need fertilizer, like you need good soil. So like why would you waste your waste when you can turn it into good soil?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's so many cross correlations, not just with the regen movement, but with DAOs as well. When I first moved out here, I did, in fact, have a dream about starting an artist residency program. I have a background in the fine arts, and I've had a wonderful opportunity bouncing around the world, spending time in incredible places with incredible people through residency structures. But now being involved in the DAO space, I'm thinking more and more about not just artists, but an opportunity to put artists in relation or like in conversation with Web3 builders. And I think maybe a third part of that would be, I don't know, permaculturists, like like land developers, not developers, but I mean people that are able to move earth and think about like interesting architectural projects, like a different kind of hands-on builder, and basically to like incubate a space where these people can have a conversation. I think this actually might be the year where I start laying some groundwork for forming this artist in residency program. I know you've also had similar ambitions with interfacing like DAOs with land projects or building projects or co-living projects or things like that, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what I was originally most interested. Like when I was, because like before crypto, I was researching this sort of like eco villages, self-sustainable living. You know, like all of this sort of stuff. And I was like, okay, I would love to build a village at some point. And then, okay, so maybe I should just build a virtual village first. And then after starting to do that, I thought, okay, so there's a lot of these eco villages that exist already. So maybe the next step would be to just start connecting more of these, like with these virtual spaces. And then the DAO space also seems to be more and more interested in like connecting with physical locations and like meeting in the real world. And now also interested more in like regenerative stuff. And there's even DAOs who are like buying land. So I think the time has come. And we actually have a few in the network. And it's really time that we start putting them on the website. One of the last projects that we onboarded into Metagame was Agartha. And their goal is specifically curating a network of like intentional communities and eco-villages that are like open to technology or like more like futurist oriented. I don't know how to say, but you know, like there's a lot of these communities that are really like either like super spiritual or like anti-technology or a bit like not super compatible with the DAO space. So I think what they are doing is also super cool. And they also like when they join Metagame, they ask like how could they plug in all of those places into Metagame. And we already have like 5 of those places inside Metagame, and now we have even more, but we still don't have it like displayed anywhere. And I think that will be the next step of like when transitioning Metagame into phase 2, like actually displaying these physical locations and trying to get more people into these physical locations, and then having these locations like post about what their needs are. Like, okay, we want to like build an like automate some parts of our farm, or like some surveillance system for the crops or whatever that could be like met by people with digital skills, or even just like barn raising projects of like, okay, we have a season of work, like we are doing a season of like we are leading like building something or like taking some crops, and we are offering well, like 10 people can come here and stay here for free and have food for free, and they just have to help with this. And then some other that like some DAO that might want to have their community members meet might take this opportunity and like go there, do some team building, meet, stay there for free, and also help other people at the same time. Like there's more and more interested in this sort of stuff, and also wonder how much AI might accelerate this stuff, like when people start having so much options of working in the digital space, and more of them become more interested in like going back to the land.
What do you mean? To what extent do you think AI will infuse with this idea of land projects? Like with, as you said, automating farms, stuff like that? Like
No, I mean in terms of like well, this is like just wild speculation, because we don't like, there's people have been saying about crypto that is going to solve so much, and now they're saying about AI, so it might take another 20 years. But like people are building with AI, people are designing with AI, so like it seems that
yeah.
a lot of jobs will disappear, and a lot of specifically virtual work will disappear. And then if this
Oh,
happens,
yeah.
people have less chance to do work, and will like need cheaper places to live, or will just like want to move to these kind of places. In that sense, not that like AI will help on the farm, but more like force people to move to these kind of places where it's much cheaper to live.
Yeah, I see. That makes a lot of sense now. You know what I really like about that is it's kind of a reversal of this idea of AI overlords. Like instead of you're proposing basically instead of becoming slaves to AI, which on the contrary, it would be an emancipatory technology that would give give humans the freedom of time and space, and maybe even ideally economic resources. Like I think for me, the ultimate dream of automation, and AI is definitely included in that, is not so dissimilar from the ultimate dream of regenerative crypto economics and blockchain technology, which is after we solve some of the hard material problems of heat and computation and energy consumption and server farms and all of that kind of shit, ultimately we'll have this incredible public good type resource that allows us to solve these other difficult problems like distribution and supply chains of water and food and medicine around the world, and of knowledge and information for that matter. And like, hey, please solve our economic system for us. And not it's not going to be like push of a button, of course. It's going to require an incredible sustained collaborative effort, but I love that you're thinking of that towards the direction of encouraging humans to return back to the land and focus on some of these more direct experiences with the landscape and with having an abundance of time. And I'm probably like projecting a little bit on top of what you said, or maybe quite a bit, but yeah, maybe that's the beginning of a short story we can collaborate on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it goes in both directions. Like, it might be abundance of time due to like people, like, jobs being automated and like people making a lot of money. And I met a lot of people who say, "Oh, if I had enough money, I would just buy a farm and move to land." So people might move for that reason, or like they don't have a job anymore and now they don't have many options but to go there. But yeah, I'm really looking for. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Actually, I'm really looking forward to like having this groundwork set, like, and Metagame stop being so focused on like the basic infrastructure stuff and like onboarding people to the DAO space and all of that, and then like being more plugged into the real world and like yeah, having some better collective intelligence and like figuring out, okay, so what are the other bigger problems worth solving that are outside of the crypto domain and more connected to the physical world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very interested in that momentum, and also in projects that are already kind of underway, like Cabin DAO, for example, continues to be a real inspiration for how they're trying to connect some of these dots, and others too, which escape me off the top of my head. But yeah, that definitely seems like something you and I should powwow about, and how to maybe try to combine forces or at least scheme strategies. Because I agree, like I think we're moving into a moment where these kinds of ideas are very ripe and are going to be very impactful for leveling up intentional communities, and also creating some like sustainable meaning for the DAO ecosystem to organize towards. I mean, there's all so many different kinds of references from, you know, thinking about CSAs and cooperative structures as proto DAOs or early influences that have evolved into DAO architecture, to, yeah, like we've already mentioned, like some of these permacultural ideas that like needing to interface with the plants and animals and weather patterns and just various physical conditions in a space will totally influence the way that you think about the cultural distribution of value and economic distribution of value within these purely digital economies or digital communities. So I think having more Taoists, more Web3 builders touching more grass and getting dustier and hanging out with goats is definitely a really important and really strong idea.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, having some DAO residencies, I think that would be super cool. And I love that we've been able to talk about all of this without mentioning the lately super popular idea of network states. And I find it so like they talk about this recognition from other nation states. I'm like, oh, what the fuck? Like, we have so many more important things to do than to like try to get diplomatic recognition from nation states. That's such a dumb goal. But yeah, let's not get in there. We were talking about nice things and the beautiful future, and we've been going on for over an hour. Unfortunately, I think it's time to wrap up, but we should definitely talk more.
Yeah, that's fair. I was wondering how long you wanted this to go on.
Try to keep it under an hour, but I rarely manage because I always get so cool people, and it's hard to stop these conversations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've definitely identified a lot of threads that we should continue to jam on asynchronously, but yeah, I mean, we can just kind of arbitrarily bring it to a close. I appreciate you inviting me to come have this conversation. I definitely feel inspired to think about some of these things deeper. Yeah, man, appreciate you. Appreciate the work that you're doing in the space. Appreciate the energy and the lucidity and the creativity. Appreciate your creativity so much. We need more of that in the DAO space too.
I appreciate you coming on, man. Always awesome talking to you, and this was a lot of fun and definitely inspiring as well. And I hope that our listeners will find it inspiring as well. Cool, man. Yeah, have a great day, and hope to see you at MetaFest.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna try to make it. We'll see. I'll keep you posted. All right. Thanks, Pete. See you later.
Sounds good. See ya.